Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, we are back with pre-partition history of Pakistan. We have, alhamdulillah, covered all the events from 1947 to 1919. Today, students, we are going to cover a quite lengthy topic which is important also, and the topic is Khilafat Movement of 1919. We will try to cover all aspects of the movement, its background, main aim of the Muslims behind this movement, all the efforts done by the Muslim leaders and all the consequences and impacts of the movement. The source of this lecture is Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Said, a book recommended by FPSC. So stay focused and let's get started. So here is the brief introduction of the Khilafat movement. Students' Khilafat movement was a movement started by Indian Muslim leaders to show support and allegiance to Ottoman Empire and to express the anger at the end of Khilafat in Turkey and at the dismemberment of Turkey after its ignominious defeat in World War I. It was a very widespread movement. Many Muslims took part in it. In fact, Muslims tried very hard to align Hindus also in this movement. Some of the prominent leaders of the movement are Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, and Maulana Shaukat Ali Johar. But students, why Muslims were trying to prevent the downfall of Ottoman Empire? Well, the answer is simple. Students, there was rule of Khilafat in Turkey and all other sacred places of Muslims, that is Jerusalem, Palestine, Damascus, Baghdad, and Konya. And Khilafat is the way of ruling an empire invented by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Muslims all over the world are followers of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they had strong feelings and devotion for the Khilafat. Moreover, subcontinent and Ottoman Empire particularly had very strong relations since the formation of the empire, and Indian Muslims feared the end of the Khilafat. Turkey was fighting against Britain and India was under the rule of Britain. Therefore, Muslim leaders exacted promises from Britain of the territorial integrity of Turkey. Britain failed to keep the promises and Turkey was dismembered. Then Muslims felt deceived and betrayed and started this movement against British Empire. So this was a brief introduction and now we would start the detailed story of Khilafat movement of 1919. Alright students, let's start with the background of Khilafat movement. Students, I have explained it in the previous slide that subcontinent and Ottoman Empire had deep-rooted relations. It was a Muslim empire and it was ruled by a Khalifa. This was the way of ruling an empire taught by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The relationship between subcontinent and the Khilafat was established in the time of pious Caliphate, and after pious Caliphate, subcontinent maintained cordial relations with all the successive dynasties that were under Muslim rule, for instance, Umayyad dynasty, Abbasid dynasty, and finally the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire was founded when Mughal Empire was established in India. Therefore, the two Muslim empires were in strong relations and all the leaders of India had always been very respectful towards the Khilafat and Khalifa of their respective time. They always regarded Turkey as their religious leader and guardian of the Muslims. But during World War I, Turkey sided with Germany, which was against British Empire, and Muslims of India started fearing the ignominious fate of the Ottoman Empire if the war was lost. They feared the end of Khilafat and loss of honor and prestige of Muslims throughout the world. So to prevent this, Muslim leaders started this movement. And to pacify the leaders, British government made promises with Indian Muslims that the sanctity of the holy places of Muslims would be reserved and Turkey would not be disintegrated. But students, promises and pledges are kept when two parties are of equal power and status. When one is colonizer and the other party is the colony, there is no reliability of these promises and pledges. British government reneged on the promises very arrogantly. Ottoman Empire was overthrown and Turkey was dismembered. British made pacts with other colonial powers, that is France and Russia, and after the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920, the empire was divided among these powers and the Khilafat was overthrown. Muslims felt betrayed and hoodwinked. Moreover, the massacre of Jallianwala Bagh that occurred on April 30, 1919 also worsened the situation. These blatant, ruthless acts of British disillusioned Indians and most importantly Muslims. Muslims now realized that British are indifferent towards Muslims and they do not care about their well-being. Thereafter, Muslims and Hindus decided to forge ahead unitedly for the last time. Muslims changed the nature of the movement. At first, they just held conferences and made committees and exacted promises from British government. But after the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920 and after the dismemberment of Turkey, they started protest and expressing their fury by stopping cooperation with British government. So students, we are done with the background of the movement. Now we are going to study the main aims of the movement. We know that the movement was started by Indian Muslims to show support to Khilafat in Ottoman Empire. Its aim was to protect Khilafat from being overthrown in Turkey. For this, they exacted promises from British government. Another aim was the protection of territorial integrity of the empire. Indian Muslims feared the dismemberment of the empire, dethroning of the Khalifa and losing ownership of the sacred places of Muslims. Therefore, their aims were to prevent the dethroning of the Khalifa and to make sure that Muslims' sacred places remain under the authority of the Khalifa. So these were the main aims, or we can say demands, of Indian Muslims in Khilafat movement of 1919. Alright students, we are done with the background of the movement, we are done with the aims of the movement. Now we are going to study all those efforts that Muslim leaders made to achieve the aims that I explained in the previous slide. Students, first, Indian Muslims were not enraged at British. They saw British as their ruler and they just demanded the guaranteed protection and sovereignty of Khilafat. They made Majlis-e-Khuddam-e-Kaaba and they succeeded in extracting promises from British that the holy places of Muslims would not be harmed through this majlis, through this organization. Then they wrote memorials to British government to direct their attention towards the matter of Turkey. In these memorials, they expressed that what Khilafat means to them, and they demanded that the matter of Turkey should be solved sagaciously by universal leaders. Then students, Muslim leaders got united and established a committee named Khilafat Committee on March 20, 1919. Sayyid Shah Muhammad was the president of this committee. It was just the initial step, and afterwards a nationwide organization was formed under the auspices of this committee, which was named All India Khilafat Committee. Then students, Indian leaders opened branches of this Khilafat Committee in every nook and corner of the country. Students, it shows that how serious these leaders were towards Khilafat and Turkey. It shows their respect and feelings towards Khilafat. Then students, on November 23, 1919, a conference was held named All India Khilafat Conference, presided by Maulvi A.K. Fazlul Haq. And in this conference, 4 resolutions were passed. The resolutions are as following. There are 4 resolutions. First of all, the first resolution that they passed was Muslims would not be participating in the celebration of the armistice to express their anger over the excesses committed against the holy places in Iran and Turkey. Then Muslims would be forced to adopt a non-cooperative stance against the British government. Then resolution number 3, Muslims would boycott the British goods in case Turkey was treated unjustly. Then the fourth resolution, a delegation was to be formed to inform the British government about the feelings of the Muslims on the question of Khilafat. And you would see in the future that the Muslims followed these resolutions and very devotedly acted upon these. Here are some more acts of Muslims that they committed in Khilafat movement. Khilafat delegation, whose resolution was passed in All India Khilafat Conference that I explained in the previous slide, was sent to England to present some demands in December 1919. Maulana Muhammad Ali led this delegation and they presented some points in front of the British Prime Minister named Lloyd George. But he wasn't very convinced with these people and he rejected the arguments of the delegation. He asserted that the matter of the treaty would be resolved on the same principles at which the matter of Christian states was resolved. So the delegation failed. Then Treaty of Sevres was signed in 1920, and after this treaty, Muslims completely lost all the trust in British pact and promises. This treaty was imposed on Turkey. Turkey was divided between France, Italy, Greece, and Britain. It made Indian Muslims intensely angry. They lost their patience and trust in British pledges. Muslims then protested and passed resolutions against British. Then students, Gandhi started non-cooperation movement and his movement was linked with Khilafat movement also. Muslims who took part in Khilafat movement took part in this non-cooperation movement also and tried to reinvigorate their movement in a new way. They adopted many ways to stop cooperation with British government. A fatwa called Tark-e-Mawalat was issued by Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Hind in 1920 and this fatwa obliged Muslims to disassociate themselves from all executive and legislative councils. Muslims started boycotting government schools and colleges to express their wrath. Moreover, they renounced the government titles and relinquished honorary offices and magistracy. So students, these were the ways adopted by Indian Muslims to show their fury in Khilafat movement. These were all the efforts made by Indian Muslim leaders. Now students, we are going to study a very important part of this movement. Students, we Muslims believe that it is the duty of a Muslim to render succor of every kind to the Muslims who are in trouble. And in Khilafat movement, Indian Muslims were fulfilling their religious obligations. But students, in doing so, they committed many irrational acts also that caused losses to them. Here, I have mentioned some of the irrational acts that they committed. First of all, students, Muslims crossed all the limits in trying to win the hearts and support of Hindus in Khilafat movement. They committed blasphemy. Ahmed Said in his book Trek to Pakistan states that they recognized the Vedas as revealed books. They participated in puja and Nauzubillah, they frequently announced that Gandhi deserves to be a prophet. They used to say that Gandhi would have been a prophet if the prophethood had not been stopped. They even stopped slaughtering of cows to please Hindus. But the worst of all, they allowed a fanatic Hindu, Shardhanan, to deliver a speech from the pulpit of Jami Masjid. They allowed a Hindu person to sit on the pulpit of a masjid. These acts of Muslims are deplorable, and they did all this just to win the support of Hindus in Khilafat movement and to get united with Hindus, which was unfortunately impossible. Another irrational act was the fatwa of Tark-e-Mawalat. Students, in order to follow this fatwa, Muslims did great damage to themselves economically and socially also. Hundreds of thousands of people stopped their children from going to government schools and colleges. Data shows that 3,000 of students abandoned their studies in Calcutta only. And to add insult to the injury, Hindus took benefit of the situation and filled the gap created by Muslims instantly in all governmental institutions. Then, students, Muslim leaders pressurized Muslim colleges to turn down the financial aid from the government. One such example is MAO College, when Maulana Muhammad Ali pressurized the management of MAO College to turn the financial aid from the government. It created a rift between Maulana Muhammad Ali and the MAO College. Here are some more irrational acts of Muslims during the Khilafat movement. Students, in 1920, Muslims started Hijrat Movement. A fatwa was issued which declared migration from India for Muslims desirable. Then thousands of Muslims sold their properties and headed towards Kabul. Students, it was like a dream come true for Hindus. Muslims were a minority in India, and getting rid of that minority was a positive thing for the majority. Ahmed Said, in his book Trek to Pakistan, states that by the second week of August 1920, almost more than 30,000 Muslims had migrated from India to Kabul, and Hindus bought their properties at throwaway prices. Students, it was a great loss for Muslims. Muslims just optimistically imagined that they would be welcomed in another state, but it was not realistic and it was not possible. At first, Afghan government welcomed them, but afterwards the government closed its frontiers. Now, a large number of Muslims were homeless in India. Another irrational act was the passing of a resolution in Khilafat Committee in 1921 that urged Muslims to abandon the military and police service in India. So students, these were some of the irrational, emotional acts of Muslims that they committed in Khilafat movement, and these acts incurred heavy losses to Muslims of India. End of Khilafat movement. Students, Khilafat movement ended in 1922. Well, an incident took place in India in 1922 in district Gorakhpur. Students, here a mob of protesters went bananas and set a police station on fire in a market called Chora Chori. 21 constables were burned to death, and after this heinous incident, Gandhi announced the discontinuation of non-cooperation movement. With the end of non-cooperation movement, Khilafat movement also ended. Students, there was another reason behind the end of Khilafat movement. Well, in 1922, students, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of democratic Turkey, himself abolished the Khilafat and set a democratic Turkey. So the purpose of the movement ended and the Khilafat movement came to an end. So students, we have studied almost everything about the Khilafat movement, how it started, who were the leaders behind it, what were the aims and objectives, what ways were adopted by Muslim leaders to achieve those objectives, and how the movement ended. Now we're going to study the impacts of the movement. Well, the impacts can for sure be divided into two categories, that is positive and negative, and we would be starting with the positive impacts of the movement. Students, one of the positive impact of the movement was that it created a good image of Indian Muslims in the Muslim world. Muslim leaders earned respect of Turks. Turks themselves admitted that they realized the importance of national freedom by the speeches and articles of Indian Muslim leaders. Then, Muslims were disillusioned with the British and Hindus for good. Hindu-Muslim alliance was built, which was broken for good after this movement. Muslims realized their status in the eyes of British. Jallianwala Bagh massacre disillusioned Muslims from British. It destroyed the myth of Muslim loyalty. They also recognized the cunning nature of Hindus also. They committed blasphemous acts to appease Hindus, yet they were unable to change the nature of Hindus. Furthermore, Muslims got political experience, and I believe that it was the most important and the best impact of the movement. A strong political consciousness was awakened in Muslims. Muslims realized their own political identity. Muslims succeeded in breaking the yoke of slavery. They got over the terror of the Raj and considered going to jail. These years of trouble and turmoil prepared Muslims for another movement of future known as Pakistan Movement. Another important positive impact is that it united Muslims of India. Almost all factions of the society started taking part in politics due to the matter of Khilafat. It inspired two most important factions of the society, which are students and the ulama. It inspired ulama to come out of their religious schools and take part in politics. The tradition of student politics started from Khilafat Committee. Furthermore, many educational institutions were established due to this movement. Jamia Millia, an educational institution, is a memento of Khilafat movement. Maulana Muhammad Ali parted ways with MNAO College and established this institution. Other institutions were also opened, named Madrasa Islamia Kolkata, National College Patna, and Kumi School Delhi. Then it strengthened the Muslims mentally also. It increased the courage and morale of Indian Muslims. Khilafat movement gave birth to leaders of invincible conviction and unshakable faith. People started admiring their own culture back and abandoned the Western culture. People gave up the life of pomposity and affectation and voluntarily started living a life of austerity. One such example is Maulvi Mazrul Haq, whose own house was no less than a grand palace. He opted to live in a hermitage known as Sadaqat Ashram. Another very important and positive impact of the movement is that it gave political experience to Muslim women of India. Muslim women for the first time got out of the houses and participated in politics. Biamma Abida Banu, the mother of Ali brothers, regularly attended the public rallies. All India Women Conference was also established. Amjadi Banu, Muhammad Ali Johor's wife, also participated in movement and later participated in Pakistan movement. So these were the positive impacts of Khilafat movement, and now we would study how this movement impacted negatively. Students, first of all, the non-cooperation movement and the Tarki Mawalat Fatwa did great damage to Muslims. Muslims quit their studies, they quit their government jobs that caused economic and social decline of Muslims. Moreover, Muslims vacated many high positions which were then filled by Hindus. Muslims let Hindus take their place. Another negative impact was from the Hijrat movement that rendered many Muslims homeless. Moreover, Muslims committed many blasphemous acts to please and win the support of Hindus. Then Muslim leaders fought among themselves. One of the examples is the rift between MAO College and Maulana Muhammad Ali. So students, this was all about Khilafat movement. We tried to cover it from all the dimensions. We studied almost all aspects of the movement. We started from the background of the movement and ended with the positive and negative impacts of the movement. I tried to make it clear and understandable, and I hope those who are listening definitely enjoyed the lecture. So here we end today's lecture. In the next lecture, we would study Delhi Muslim Proposals and Simon Commission of 1928. Till then, students, stay focused on your goals and studies. Like the video, subscribe the channel. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.